Alright folks, welcome back to Boss Economic World. The place where we slice through the jargon, bypass the spin, and get to the juicy, marbled truth at the heart of the economy. Today, we're tackling a story that has everything: a high-stakes legal drama, constitutional fireworks, and a price tag so big it would make Jeff Bezos blush. We're talking about a showdown in Washington that makes a heavyweight title fight look like a schoolyard squabble. The date is November 5, 2025. In one corner, we have President Donald J. Trump, now in his second term and swinging his favorite economic hammer, tariffs. In the other corner, the 9 justices of the Supreme Court, who are about to decide if that hammer is even legal. Trump himself, in a classic late-night social media post, called this case life or death for our country. He's not known for understatement, but this time, he might not be that far off. This isn't just about a few extra bucks on your new TV. This is about who really runs the American economy, the president or the Constitution? So, grab your coffee, which, by the way, is probably more expensive because of all this, and let's break down the $140 billion question facing the Supreme Court. Let's get the big numbers out of the way first, because they are staggering. According to a fresh analysis from our friends at Bloomberg Economics, the tariffs Trump has imposed using this one specific law, we'll get to what that is in a second, are currently hauling in $556 million per day. Let me put that in perspective for you. That's like the US Treasury getting the entire box office revenue of a blockbuster movie like Avatar, The Way of Water every single day. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, another $500 million. By the end of this year, the total take from these specific tariffs is set to blast past $140 billion. That's more than the entire annual GDP of Puerto Rico. Now, a key part of the Boss Economic World philosophy is understanding who actually pays for things. When you hear tariffs on China, it sounds like China is paying. But that's not how it works. A tariff is a tax. It's paid by the American company that imports the goods, the importer of record. And who do they pass that cost on to? You guessed it. You, me, and everyone buying stuff. Right now, the effective tariff rate on all US imports is a whopping 15.9%. For context, when Trump came back into office in January, it was just 2.3%. That's a nearly 7-fold increase in the average tax on everything from car parts to microchips to the sneakers on your feet. This isn't some abstract economic theory. Let's talk about a real person. Jess Nepstad runs a cool little company in Montana called Planetary Design. They make French presses and other coffee gear. He recently told reporters he was hit with a mistaken overcharge of $200,000 in tariffs on a single shipment. A mistake. He proved it was an error to customs, but they told him it would take 300 days to get his money back. Now, imagine that's happening to thousands of businesses, but it's not a mistake, it's the policy. That's a massive, economy-wide cash flow crunch. It's money that isn't being used to hire people, to invest in new equipment, or to expand. It's stuck in a bureaucratic vortex. And that, my friends, is why this Supreme Court case is about way more than just legal texts. So, what's the legal magic wand Trump is waving to summon these billions of dollars out of thin air? It's a 1977 law called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA. And here's where the story gets beautifully ironic. IEPA was passed in the wake of the Watergate scandal. Its entire purpose was to rein in presidential power. Congress was tired of presidents just declaring endless national emergencies to do whatever they wanted. So, they wrote this law to put guardrails on that power, primarily for things like freezing assets of terrorist groups or imposing sanctions on rogue nations, financial warfare, basically. No president, not Carter, not Reagan, not Bush, Clinton, Bush II, or Obama, ever used IEPA to impose tariffs. Why? Because the Constitution is crystal clear on this point. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 gives Congress, and only Congress, the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. It's called the power of the purse. It's the legislature's biggest check on the executive. The small businesses and states suing the administration are making a very simple argument. Look at the text of IEPA. The word tariff isn't in there. They argue this was deliberate. Congress never intended to give away its most fundamental power. But Trump's second term has been all about pushing the boundaries of executive authority. He's found IEPA to be the perfect tool. Why? Because it's fast. Other laws that allow for tariffs, like Section 232 or Section 301 that he used in his first term, require lengthy investigations, reports, and public comment periods. They can take up to 9 months. IEPA, in Trump's interpretation, is like an economic red button. All he has to do is declare an emergency, and boom, tariffs. And what constitutes an emergency? Well, that's been a moving target. He's used IEPA to tax goods from China, Mexico, and Canada, citing the fentanyl crisis. For other countries, he cited the persistent U.S. trade deficit, something most economists would call a structural feature of the global economy, not a sudden emergency. He slapped tariffs on Brazil over the political prosecution of his ally, former President Bolsonaro. He hit India for buying Russian oil. Most bizarrely, he recently threatened more tariffs on Canada because a Canadian TV network ran a public service announcement featuring a 1987 speech by Ronald Reagan where Reagan, wait for it, spoke out against using tariffs. You can't make this stuff up. It's like punishing your neighbor because his dog barked at your cat, which was trying to eat his bird. The administration's argument, presented by Solicitor General D. John Sauer, is breathtaking in its scope. They argue that not only can the president decide what an emergency is, but that the courts have no right to even review that decision. They say judges lack the institutional competence to second-guess the president on foreign threats. If the Supreme Court buys that argument, the implications are profound. Any future president could, theoretically, declare a climate emergency and ban all fossil fuel imports, or a supply chain emergency and force companies to move production. It essentially turns the presidency into an economic monarchy, governing by decree. Now, let's follow the money. Wall Street hates uncertainty, but it loves a good bet. And this case is the biggest bet in town. First, the professional gamblers. Betting markets, where people legally wager on political and legal outcomes, are currently giving Trump a 40% chance of winning. That means a 60% chance of losing. That's not a slam dunk, but it shows you where the smart money thinks this is headed. But the really interesting action is in a niche, super sophisticated corner of finance. Wall Street firms, hedge funds, and private equity have been creating a new market, the tariff refund trade. Think about it. A company like Target or Home Depot has paid, let's say, $2 billion in these IEEPA tariffs over the last year. If the Supreme Court rules the tariffs were illegal, they are owed a $2 billion refund from the U.S. Treasury. But when will they get it? Remember Jess Nepstad's 300-day wait for his $200,000? A multi-billion-dollar refund could take years to process. So, a hedge fund comes along and says, hey, Target. That $2 billion is a nice idea, but it's uncertain. We'll give you $1.5 billion in cash, right now. We'll buy the rights to your claim, and we'll wait for the full $2 billion from the government. You get cash now, we take the risk and the wait. This is happening on a massive scale. Billions of dollars are being positioned to profit from a Trump loss. It's a massive, complex bet on the textual interpretation of a 1977 law. This is peak 2025 finance, my friends. For the average investor, the uncertainty is a nightmare. The ruling isn't expected for weeks or even months. This hangs a giant question mark over the crucial fourth quarter and the holiday retail season. Will prices on imported goods suddenly drop? Will companies get a massive cash infusion? Or will the high tariff, high inflation environment continue? The stock market is essentially treading water, waiting for 9 people in black robes to give it direction. Okay, let's game this out. There are 2 main paths forward, and they lead to 2 very different Americas. Scenario A, Trump wins. The Supreme Court affirms that the president can use IEEPA to impose tariffs for any self-declared emergency. The immediate impact is that the economic status quo holds. The 15.9% effective tariff rate remains, keeping upward pressure on prices for consumers and squeezing margins for importers. The president's favorite economic tool is validated and supercharged. His "our economy will go to hell if he loses" comment becomes his victory lap soundbite. But the long-term impact is a fundamental shift in the balance of power. The president now has a unilateral, unreviewable power to tax and regulate huge swaths of the economy with the stroke of a pen. Trade policy becomes even more volatile and unpredictable, subject to the whims of one person. This would be, as critics say, the birth of an imperial presidency on economic matters. For global markets and allies, it means American economic policy becomes a black box. Scenario B, Trump loses. This is where things get really interesting and messy. The Supreme Court rules that IEEPA does not grant the authority to levy tariffs. First, the good news for importers and consumers. Up to $140 billion worth of tariffs are deemed illegal. The effective tariff rate would get sliced in half, falling from 15.9% to around 6.5%, according to Bloomberg Economics. That's still much higher than the 2.3% it was before, because Trump's other tariffs would remain, but it would be a huge relief. It would act as a massive, immediate brake on inflation for goods. Then comes the chaos. The refund. As Ken Smetters at the Penn Wharton budget model points out, returning over $140 billion to American companies could act as a massive economic stimulus. It's a sudden cash injection that could fuel investment, hiring, and stock buybacks. But how do you even do it? The U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency would be tasked with processing potentially millions of refund claims. It would be a logistical and bureaucratic Everest. Jess Nepstad's fear is the key one: how long is it going to take for all of us businesses to get our money back? It's going to be mind-blowing. The government could be ordered to pay, but the checks might be in the mail for a very, very long time. And does this end the trade wars? Absolutely not. This is a crucial point. A loss for Trump would be a significant blow, but not a fatal one to his agenda. It takes away his fastest, most powerful weapon. But he still has the other tools in his arsenal, the slower, more methodical tariff statutes he used in his first term. He would be forced to go back to the 9-month investigation process. It would be like taking away his grenade launcher but leaving him with a sniper rifle. He can still do damage, he just has to be more patient. When you strip away the billions of dollars and the legal jargon, this case boils down to a question that's as old as the Republic itself. As a bipartisan group of legal scholars, including the brilliant conservative Professor Michael McConnell, wrote in their brief to the court, this dispute is not about the wisdom of tariffs or the politics of trade. It is about who holds the power to tax the American people. McConnell calls this the most significant case on presidential economic power since 1952, when the Supreme Court blocked President Truman from seizing steel mills during the Korean War. This is one of those generational cases that will define the boundaries of American government for decades to come. It pits two fundamental visions of the presidency against each other. One sees the president as a dynamic actor on the world stage, needing broad, flexible power to respond to threats as he sees them. The other sees a system of checks and balances, where the awesome power to tax and regulate commerce is deliberately and carefully divided, to prevent exactly the kind of one-man rule we're seeing debated. So, as the lawyers make their arguments and the justices sharpen their questions, remember what's really at stake. It's not just the price of your next iPhone or the fate of the holiday shopping season. It's about the very architecture of American power. This decision will tell us whether the emergency button is a limited tool for genuine crises or a blank check for a president to remake the economy in his own image. We'll be watching the oral arguments for clues. Are the justices focused on the plain text of the law? Are they worried about the practical chaos of a reversal? Or are they focused on that big, constitutional question of who gets to be the boss? This is a true nail-biter, with consequences for every business, every consumer, and every future president. So keep your eyes glued to the Supreme Court. History is being written, and your bank account has a front-row seat. We'll be right back here to break it all down the moment a decision drops. Until then, stay sharp, stay informed, and don't take any wooden nickels, especially if they have a 15.9% duty slapped on them. This is Boss Economic World, signing off.